Hello everyone and welcome to FiST Chat, the podcast that features discussions on the topics of film, science and technology. My name is Ben Warner and I'm joined once again by my good friend and colleague Steve Kern. How you doing on this fine afternoon, Steve?
I'm well, thanks Ben. Hello FiST Chat fans. I'm quite interested actually into today's discussion. Very interesting.
Absolutely. Before we get into that, don't forget our website, www.fistchat.com. You can get all our links there. Interact with us and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. I'd love to hear from you. And one of our topics today was actually suggested by one of our Facebook followers, so that's quite nice, and we'll mention him a bit later. Our back episodes are on YouTube, Vimeo, and Digicosm TV, so you can check them out there, and you can subscribe to our audio via iTunes, RSS, and FeedBurner. And don't forget to check out our weekly blogs, and I'm sure we'll have some for this week's topic, because it's quite fascinating, really. And if we dive straight into that, I saw a story on Lateline a couple of days ago, which essentially was a rogue it's been described as a rogue geoengineering project where 100 tons of iron dust was deliberately poured into the Pacific Ocean off the Canadian coast. And the idea here was that it was seen as a way to combat the effects of climate change, because it was actually having a rejuvenating effect on the ecosystem in the ocean. Controversial, I'm sure, because obviously it was rogue. These guys didn't have any permissions, so to speak, to go out and do that. And apparently they, what were they saying here? That it was the phytoplankton or something was coming back to
phytoplankton. Yeah, so let's just start off with what geoengineering is, Ben. It's a deliberate attempt to manipulate climate. That's what they've said this is. What it might appear to be is this is the act of a corporation that has dumped iron into the ocean, and dumping anything in the ocean is illegal under international law.
Yeah.
To basically stimulate the growth of phytoplankton, which will fix carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. But the idea behind this, I think, is to rejuvenate the marine environment, i.e. get more fish into the area, and basically this corporation then would allegedly probably catch more fish.
If we just put aside the legal implications for the time being, when I was watching this, it almost seemed like magic fairy dust type stuff when I was looking at it, because it seemed like, you go along, just sprinkle a bit of this stuff in the ocean and bang, everything just comes back to normal. And even it was saying that it was, it could affect, like the CO2 and all of that sort of thing, the levels and all of that.
It does. You see, what people don't realise is while we're worried about the atmosphere, which we can't actually see, the gases around us, the ocean plays a huge role in regulating the amount of carbon dioxide and the relationship of the gases and holding carbon as well.
Yeah.
So it does seem like a great way to do it, but it's completely uncontrolled, and you're messing with the oceans, which principally control the makeup of the gases around us. So while we can have a good guess, because the science in this is reasonable, in fact, in terms of we know what will happen in the short term, adding a bit of fairy dust iron to the oceans, but we don't know what the longer term effects are. And the reality is honestly, if we're messing up our atmosphere and our environment by throwing man-made substances into it, should we really be attempting to fix the problem by throwing man-made substances into it?
Yeah, well, that's exactly, yeah. And it's like you said, it's the long-term impact. Who knows what's going to happen at some later point. It's a nice idea because it sounds like an easy fix. You can imagine governments jumping on this and all of that. Oh yeah, just do that and it's problem solved, because climate change has been a huge problem, and it's been a complicated problem, and this type of easy fix solution would be attractive, but again, it depends on whether it actually works in the long term.
Well, you're absolutely right, and certainly I'm personally not against geoengineering. I just think it should be an absolute last resort, and we should know a lot more about it. And it should be done by an international body of scientists, not some bloody cigar-smoking corporate, scientist, I think, as he refers to himself. FiST Chat fans should check this story out. Ben's got the link up on our site. But, further to this, the first step in fixing climate change is fixing the way we treat our environments.
Yeah.
So it's treating the ocean better. It's treating the land and the resources on land better. It's not just putting more stuff into the atmosphere.
Well, at the end of the day, this wouldn't be necessary if we were doing all those things.
Well, yeah, and the worst case scenario is, and will probably be seen in another sci-fi film sometime in the future, where we've pumped so much into the Earth's atmosphere, we're living in bubbles on Earth.
Yeah.
Because, we really screwed everything up.
And that would be a tragedy, I'm sure.
That would be, but then that, raises questions such as going to another planet and terraforming a place like Mars so we can live there.
And do all the same things again, sprinkling the fairy dust around on Mars instead.
Well, we're going to segue in a minute probably into the Mars side of things, but if there is any life on Mars, whatever it is, even if we consider it insignificant today, should we be going and messing with that environment?
No, that's a good question. But now just thinking, how can these scientists just go out and do this as well? That was the other thing that I thought of when, because you're basically dumping things into the ocean. You wouldn't think that would just be all right just to do.
Well, and that's the problem. So while it's obvious, and I think we should point out that the reason we know that this has happened is because satellites spotted the algal bloom. Okay, so that's how they know. There's a huge algal bloom, and they traced it back to this corporation who I believe has had allegedly an involvement in doing things like this in the past. So they know what the effects will be, and they know that it'll create phytoplankton, and they know then that it'll probably bring more fish into the area or whatever it is that they're after. So the science there is probably pretty good. And their argument that they actually are trapping carbon is actually probably pretty good.
Yeah.
But is it really a solution? Is it a good long-term solution? And what secondary effects, will it have are the other big questions.
Oh, well, I guess when we eat our fish in the future, we'll be definitely getting a good dose of iron as well.
No doubt about that.
Okay, well, we might move earlier into our news bites today because it's sort of moving along on the same sort of topic, and we'll now go into terraforming for our film news bite. And science fiction and Star Trek fans should be well aware that that was a very big part of the film Star Trek 2 and Star Trek 3, Star Trek 3 in particular. Obviously, being a Hollywood film, it's done very simply. You just create a missile, fire it into a planet, and 5 minutes later you got a planet you can live on, which is a nice thought. But it's still a very interesting idea, even though it was done in a very sort of dramatic fashion, the way it was done in those films. Is there do you think that could potentially be believable at all? Maybe not in terms of it being done in 5 minutes, but that something could be thrown into a planet's atmosphere and over time it could rejuvenate it?
Well, this is the interesting thing. So to go back to the topic where we're talking about geoengineering on Earth, it's exactly the same. We call it geoengineering on Earth, but it's terraforming on another planet. So, I mean, the whole reason that we have climate change is because we've inadvertently geoengineered our atmosphere through our gas emissions, through fossil fuels. Now, you can take exactly the same principles on another planet. So some of the things they've suggested are releasing things in the atmosphere to scatter the sun's rays so we don't get so hot on Earth. But equally on a planet like Mars, you could put other things in the atmosphere to trap heat, which you need. You could also, add things. There's water. There's all the elements for life in the Martian atmosphere and in the Martian soil. So if you unlock them, if you retain heat in the atmosphere, and if you could grow plants, because it is a carbon dioxide rich atmosphere, potentially you could start to get more oxygen if you have a thicker atmosphere. So it would take tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, but it could be done.
Yeah.
It could be done.
So it's not the Genesis device then. It doesn't just explode in the atmosphere. Or I should point out Total Recall as well, where he puts the handprint on the button and on Mars, and then all of a sudden Mars is beautiful and blue.
Look, I wouldn't say it couldn't happen, but certainly with the technology we have today, it'd be a longer-term prospect. But this is scary. I mean, should we go to any other planet and change it so humans can live there? That's just a question. I don't know that we can answer it. It seems like a good idea today, but what if some aliens decided to come here to Earth and change the atmosphere so they could live here better?
Yeah, well, it might be good for us, I guess.
Well, what if it wasn't good for us, but it was good for them?
No, well, maybe that's another Hollywood film in the making.
I'm sure it is.
All right, we'll move on to our science topic, and again, Mars, and just thanks to Liam Jeffrey for sending that through. Hopefully I pronounced that right. And it's about a mysterious announcement that maybe NASA might make about what their current rover is discovered over there, whether it's organic molecules or signs of life, which is what it was sent over there for. And that was from a couple of different websites. I also saw a follow-up story on this in the Sydney Morning Herald, which are basically saying that NASA's being a little cagey about what they've found with this. Can you shed any light on that, Steve?
Well, I don't know any more than the rest of us, but I don't blame them for being cagey. I mean, if they've found signs that there was life on Mars, that's a big story. That has huge implications for us. If they've found the possibility that life could exist on Mars, that's a huge story, because then that means the search goes on. Yeah. But even bigger is, what if they have found life on Mars of any sort?
Is this one of those things, like from a scientific point of view, they want to make absolutely sure that that's what they've got? Because it's one of those things that if it gets discredited out of the box, then it could shut the whole thing down.
Yeah, and then next thing you've got conspiracy theories and all sorts of things like that floating around as well. It's really a matter of trust. I think that they will be doing every test, retesting, everything possible. And but also the consequences are huge. If we find any sort of life, imagine the first time we find any sort of life that was grown or derived independent of Earth, that suggests that we are not alone.
Exactly right. It's a mind-bending thought that will change, I think, a lot of perceptions of how we view ourselves, I guess.
Well, it'll mean we're not alone. It'll mean that life could exist anywhere. And this is even if we're just talking about some primordial slime. It's, we can only wait, Ben. It's very exciting. But that also means, if there is some sort of primordial life there, getting back to the terraforming question, should we be affecting it? Who knows?
Absolutely. All right, and just finally, our tech news bite. And although it's not about terraforming or anything like that, those types of processes, I'm sure, will involve computers. And
good segue, Ben.
Absolutely. And apparently the Witch computer, which is 61 years old, and that's the Wolverhampton Instrument for Teaching Computation. They've actually been able to sort of get that fired up and running again. And if you can imagine, that's exactly what you can think of as the room-sized computer, almost warehouse-sized computer, which obviously was whiz-bang back in the day, but is incredibly antiquated by today's standards. It could store 90 numbers. And that was the extent of its computational power. It's just good to see this sort of thing, really. It's sort of like, going back in time and seeing how things were done back then.
Oh, look, it's just fantastic. For any of us who have seen those old films where guys in white coats walk through rooms with lots of tape spooling, big machines, it's nice to see that somebody's actually put one back together. And as you say, it reminds us of our technological roots. Computers weren't always tiny.
Absolutely. And just finally, CNN, where they were reporting the story, has got a pretty good photo of two guys in suits looking at tape against one of the walls. The only thing that picture's missing is those magnetic tape reels, but maybe that was after this particular computer.
Oh, it probably was. I think probably back in the 60s they were still, plugging the wires in with themselves. I think I'm not 100% sure how they did it, but I think they had to resolder them every time they wanted to perform a new function.
Oh, okay. Sounds a bit all difficult. You just pick up your phone today and you can do all sorts of amazing things.
Who would have thought, hey?
Absolutely. All right, Steve, we're out of time, so thanks again for the chat.
Pleasure, Ben. Thanks, FiST Chat fans. Follow up our story on geoengineering and find out what the word is. We'd be interested to hear what you think.
Absolutely. So that's it for this week's episode, so we'll catch you next week.